You ever have one of those moments when you see history happening in front of you? Obviously, this is fiction, but if I was actually on Babylon 5 when this episode happened, yeah. I did something unprecedented, something I've never done before for any of my television ruminations to date. I actually watched this episode twice prior to leading into this rumination. I only got a couple of things the second time that I did the first time, but I mostly just wanted to watch it again. I've loved this show. It's my favorite television show of all time, but this is probably the first episode that sits in that top tier of episodes for this entire show. There's some good stuff on here. Where to start? So, this is our first shot of the Emperor. He's been mentioned a few times, he's been referenced several times, and the very concept of there being an emperor has been referenced several times, but Emperor Turhan? I'm not actually 100% sure how to pronounce that. They actually mention his name not at all in this episode, nor do they mention the name of the Prime Minister. Both characters are named later when their stories are relevant again, when they talk about them again. Obviously, since both die in this episode, that's kind of a post-mortem thing, but nevertheless. The Emperor is an interesting individual. I like him. I like the actor. I like the portrayal of him. The thing I want to talk about with regards to him is that he's Thrall from Warcraft. I imagine a lot of you have no idea what I'm talking about, because I imagine a lot of you either don't follow Warcraft's lore or didn't follow the Warcraft lore run that I have done and finished just a few months ago. So allow me to elucidate. Thrall was I don't agree with a lot of the detractors who say Thrall's a Mary Sue, who's a terrible character. I like Thrall as a character a lot. He's a very flawed, very down-to-earth individual. He's very, very powerful as a shaman, but that power does not mean he is right, and that power does not mean he just automatically makes all the right decisions. He, in fact, screws up constantly, which is part of his character arc, which is how I relate him to the Emperor, Emperor Turhan here. They say it later, I just don't remember how it's pronounced right now. Because, you see, Thrall made a big mistake in his dealings with the Alliance. He was leader of a group called the Horde, for those of you who really don't know what I'm talking about. And the Horde, in the past, another organization that also called itself the Horde, that consisted of many of the races that the new Horde are made of, was a very antagonistic, vicious, frankly bad organization that was defeated in a great war. This new Horde really has nothing to do ideologically with the old Horde. The problem is it consists of the same races. It's a blood feud. Just like, say, for example, between the Narn and the Centauri. Now, Thrall, he is an advocate of peace. A little bit too much of an advocate of peace. He is, in fact, a weak leader. He is a brilliant individual who has his heart in the right place and really wants to do what he can in order to make a better future, and yet he allows the other side, the Alliance, to basically walk all over him and his people in order to try and placate them. Starting to sound a little bit more like the Emperor now. In the end, he proved to be such a bad leader, he actually led to the worst war in this Horde's history, the proper Horde's history. Again, starting to sound more familiar, isn't it? My point here is the Centauri. I've talked many times about Centauri politics and Centauri culture. Both are rather backbiting. Both are rather vicious. The whole purple thing. They don't really offer a lot of room for peacemongers. Now, I'm not saying peace is something that is impossible, nor am I saying is it something that shouldn't happen. What I'm saying is you need a very strong leader to take a hard line against your own people and be able to manage the politics back home while still extending the hand of friendship to the former enemies, in this case the Narn. And yet everything we know about this Emperor shows that he was not that. He was not a strong leader. By his own admission, all he did was what was expected of him as Emperor. The mere fact, it's implied but never stated outright that the concessions he gave to the Narn were like the most he was either willing or capable of pulling off. You know, that was all he was able to do, that he wanted to do more. This one decision he ever made is a good gesture and would have been a great step forward in Narn-Centauri relations if not for the Centauri. Not just Rifa, although Rifa is the most responsible, I think, and not just Londo either. The Centauri as a people were ready for their emperor to die. They wanted him to die. They were just circling, waiting. They all knew there would be a bloody power struggle the moment he fell, and they all knew that they all were going to be backing certain sides. They'd already divvied up the battle lines. They were ready to go. Remember that whole speech I had about how the Centauri don't physically fight each other for dominance anymore, but they have this more polite, social fight for dominance. This is their equivalent of war. Internally, I should clarify. And they were already ready to go to war, knowing the Emperor's going to... No one's going to try to kill the Emperor. Number one, they don't need to. Number two, going after the Emperor is something you just don't do. You're going to destroy your own support if you do that. So they're all just waiting like freaking vultures for him to finally expire. Yeah. That's why I relate him to Thrall. The next thing I want to talk about is... I'm just going to kind of hit these in order. I've got a lot to talk about in this episode for once. The Narn perspective. I've talked about this before, but this is something... It's usually referred to as clan mentality, actually. In other words, the Klingons do this over in Star Trek, for example. Let's say you do something pretty bad. Your son is just as culpable in your act as you are because he's your son. I say that in a weird way because that makes absolutely no sense to me at all. I don't even begin to get the sins of the father mentality. It's very alien to me. But it is a thing, in real life as well as in fiction. So the idea that they might look at, this person, this Centauri, he's a Centauri, who's an emperor, who's a son of a butcher, well, he's just damned. It doesn't matter what he does. And it's so logical to them to blame him for all those things, because of the way they think. I also do like the way Sheridan deals with G'Kar in particular. He's very hardline, as he always is, but that's a thing that the Narn tend to respect. And we see in this episode, Sheridan does actually manage to get through to G'Kar more than once. And in addition to that whole earning respect thing, kind of shows that Sheridan does actually have his interests in mind in addition to his own, that Sheridan is willing to be an ally in Narn affairs, which is an important step that'll matter in the future, I'm sure. So once again, Rifa shows the kind of a person he is. This is great because I just talked about Bester in the last episode. Remember I had that whole speech about how he was self-interested without being self-obsessed? Rifa is self-obsessed. He is someone who does not care about burning his own people and his own country, sabotaging his own forces, his own culture, his own economy, just so he can gain greater political power, greater affluence, whatever it is he wants. It doesn't even matter in this case. But he wants more. And he is willing to damn his own people to do it. Note the total difference between how Londo approaches this whole situation and Rifa does. Rifa's like, oh, this is going to be great, and you're going to give this speech, and we'll look fantastic, and who cares about him anyways? And he's just so flippant and so happy with himself. Londo, basically this entire episode, is just... He looks like a man who is walking to his own grave and knows it, and yet feels he can't do anything but do that. That whole sense of duty. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The total contrast between the two. Londo is willing to go along with this for reasons I'll talk about in a minute, and Londo is, they're watching something funny. I don't know what they're watching. Londo, I don't even know if you can hear that. Londo is moving forward. Londo's moving forward with his plans. Well, I'll just go ahead and talk about it now. Londo wants to make the Centauri great again. That's what he's after. What's good for his people. He is damning himself, and he knows that. He is causing a lot of pain and grief, and he knows that. But he also knows that the circle of power that is gravitating around him is the one that is connected to Lord Rifa. He does not like Lord Rifa, and that is clear even now. And it'll become much more clear in the future. I don't think that's a spoiler. These two are going to be rivals for political power very, very soon. But Londo is willing to tolerate Rifa because Londo needs more power in order to make Centauri better. because he believes his people have been ground into the mud too much, and he wants to try and even the scales. So he will endure this sniveling asshole who makes him feel uncomfortable. He says as much to Veer, if it means accomplishing the greater good for the Centauri people. And that really strikes the difference between Rifa and Londo, doesn't it? Speaking of which, Veer once again shows his wisdom. I used that word before. I forget the episode it came up, but Veer, there was an episode several episodes ago that showed how Veer is a little more wise than he comes across. More knowledgeable, more capable of thinking long term. And this episode shows it again. Veer is actually willing to stand up to Londo in this episode. That's saying a lot. He may literally have torpedoed his career under other circumstances, standing up to Londo like that. And he flat out says, I hope you will understand then. And Londo immediately replies, no, you don't get it, Veer. I understand now. I know what I'm doing. And there's just this tone. God, Peter Jurassic, I don't even know if that's pronounced right. Just such an amazing job of Londo. It's one of the reasons he's one of my favorite. He is my favorite character in this show. Oh my God, he just nails it. Let me check my notes. I've kind of lost my track there. I do like the fact that Garibaldi managed to catch the guy following him. I gotta be completely honest. The Sinclair reveal knocked my knees out from under me when I first saw it. Even rewatching it, it's still a hell of a moment. The fact, for those who are not aware, nobody really saw that coming. Nobody thought that Sinclair would ever come back. Michael O'Hara was gone. He's the actor who plays Sinclair. He was gone off the show, and that, because of the way television works, that was it. He was expected never to come back, never to be present ever again. And for him to just suddenly kind of slip back in and say, hey, what's up, was a really nice little touch. I don't think it's spoiling now, finally, at this point, to mention that he will be a semi-recurring presence in the future, too, in sort of a vague sense, as much as Michael O'Hara's condition would allow him to act, basically. And I think that's great, actually. It's a great way to keep the story going, and, of course, to keep him as a character that is relevant to the story, which is always something hard to do. When you build up a major character, and then you have to put him on a bus. It sucks as a writer, speaking from personal experience as well. But yeah, I like the fact that Garibaldi pretty much, immediately caught on to the guy that was trailing him and cornered him and blah, blah, blah. I really like the build-up to the meeting with the Emperor, because the whole build-up and the whole way the scenes are framed, the music, the dialogue, we have so many different groups of people who all want to kill the Emperor, and it's like, where this is going. As a viewer, the show is very clearly just broadcasting in giant klaxons. This is leading to an assassination. We're about to watch the assassination of this gentleman. And Babylon 5 has already established itself as a show that is willing to upset the status quo. So it could have actually been Jakar who actually performed the assassination. And Lord knows what that would have done to the future. Having him fall over from his failing health before he even gets there was actually a really nice touch, and really kept the suspense there, and of course serves great focus for the next few things that happens. Another difference, I caught this my second time through, between Rifa and Londo. Londo, in every one of his portrayals and interactions with Rifa, you could tell he understands the kind of man Rifa is. Londo is an experienced politician. He is a veteran. He's been through the purple before. He has lots of money, and he's had and has lots of power. Both of those are important. So he understands the kind of man Rifa is. I've mentioned this even when Rifa first showed up. You remember that? By contrast, Rifa has no idea who and what Londo is. Most intelligent, wise, veteran politicians, when one of their allies says, oh, don't worry, I'll handle a major military operation without external help. You just go back me up. That should be setting off huge alarm bells in the back of their mind. But Rifa, well, he's an idiot. And I mean, I hate to say that, but he kind of is. He's a decent manipulator, but mostly I think he's more connected than he is intelligent. He just accepts it. Oh yeah, sure, you can handle taking out an entire Narn colony by yourself. Sure, Londo, is what it should have been. But instead he just accepts him at his word. Now granted, Londo has already demonstrated competence in this matter in the past, but that is still the thing that should be questioned. See, the thing is, Rifa looks at Londo as if he's an interesting curiosity, another ally in his path to power. They'll probably eventually be disposed of. Londo sees Rifa as dangerous, and Rifa never sees Londo as dangerous, and that's another key difference between both men. Then there's the scene. I'm sorry, this is probably going to actually be a short video because this episode hits me so many times. There's the scene where Dr. Franklin goes to meet G'Kar, and he says he wanted to say he's sorry. Franklin opens with that. Andreas Katsoulas, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, absolutely nails the performance again. His reaction, all of his pretense, all of his blustering, all of it is just instantly gone as he just turns, and you can tell it just smacks him. What? And then Franklin says, he gives the full story. He came here to apologize to you. And G'Kar is floored. And, oh God, and then G'Kar goes to get Londo. First of all, it is so obvious why this would mean so much to G'Kar. Remember, this man has not actually done anything. The Emperor Turhan has not actually done anything, really, against the Narn people, right? He's been doing the thrall thing, right? He's been bending over backwards. But the Narn don't think that way. The Narn think in terms of clan mentality. So the Emperor was willing to apologize for his clan, for the actions of his father, for the actions of his people, and for the actions of his government. An innocent man was willing to step forward and apologize. That would speak very strongly to Narn mentality and to G'Kar personally, because he would actually understand the significance of that statement. His words to Londo really resonate with me because it is my opinion that G'Kar was tired of the hate. But I turned you off. What the hell? That he was tired of constantly hating the Centauri, that it was something he would have wanted under better circumstances to let go of, especially in light of what he's discovered with the new race that's entered the array, remember? He even approached Londo and said, hatred and blah blah blah, but we've got bigger problems. I've always had that impression that G'Kar, as he has grown throughout the show, would have been willing to at least reach out a hand to the Centauri. And I especially say that because that's literally what he does. That motion. Remember, the Narn think in terms of actions. The Centauri tend to think in terms of words. But the Narn think in terms of actions. That apology was an action. Going out here, in low health, on neutral territory, to apologize to G'Kar, personally, and on behalf of the Narn people. That is an action. And that action speaks volumes to him. And G'Kar goes to Londo and offers him a drink and says it's a start. This could have literally been the beginning of Narn Centauri friendship, alliance, burying the hatchet, moving forward, and God knows what those two races could have accomplished together. But we'll never know, will we? And Londo. God, look at Londo's face as G'Kar is just gushing over him. This is also the first time Londo heard about it, too, remember? And hearing that absolutely devastates him. Notice that when next time Londo encounters G'Kar is at the meeting, the council meeting towards the end of the episode. He has trouble even bringing himself to face G'Kar. He is so ashamed and so aghast at what has happened that he can barely even acknowledge him. Also, pay very close attention to Londo's performance in that council meeting. When Sheridan basically blackmails them into saying, you should let those people go. It was a good strategy, by the way. Londo seizes on it. He actually looks excited to say, I can probably convince my government to go along with this. I'm exaggerating slightly because the gentleman's a good actor. He's a great actor. But watch that scene again. Londo is clearly happy to be able to give something back, to try and undo some of the damage he's caused, even though he did this knowing and willingly. This is why I like Londo, by the way. He is a complicated character. He's not a good guy and he's not a bad guy. He is a person. There's the Sinclair thing. Yes, by the way, for those of you who didn't already know, the Rangers thing was actually inspired from Lord of the Rings. If you've only ever been exposed to Lord of the Rings from the movies, then you probably have no idea what the Rangers are. But that's where that's from. And then Emperor Turhan gets to meet a Vorlon, and he asks the only question he wanted to ask him: how does this end? And one of my favorite Vorlon quotes in the whole series is the response: in fire. I like the scene with Garibaldi and Sheridan. Garibaldi says, I've got information for you, but I can't, and Sheridan says, you're hiding something. Garibaldi says, yeah. He's so honest about it. Yeah, of course I am. Why? Well, because I gave my word. Again, very blunt and very honest about it. Very Garibaldi. I love it. And the best part is when Sheridan says, I could order you, and Garibaldi says, yeah, you could, but then you'd never trust me with anything because anyone above you could order me. And Sheridan just kind of grins and he's like, all right, fine. I'll let you have this one. I like that because it shows that in the last 7 or 8 episodes, however long it's been, even though they haven't had a lot of time together, you can see there's a lot of professional respect between the two men. That'll be important in the future. Do me a favor and remember that. It'll be a while, but remember it. It's also really messed up what they do with the Emperor as he's dying. You are both damned. They actually use his death to further an agenda that could not be more the opposite of what he wanted. Can you imagine being killed? Well, I guess I should say he just died because he died of natural causes. Can you imagine dying and knowing as you're dying that you will be made a martyr for the exact opposite of what it is you want? What you believe in, your ideology, your philosophy, whatever it is you want to call it, whatever you champion, that the opposite of that is what's going to happen because of your death. Isn't that just a wonderful feeling? Yeah. Two final notes. Looks like I'm almost out of notes to talk about. This is a great episode. First of all, I mentioned great acting. Watch Jakar in that council scene I just referenced earlier. Jakar had talked before about how much he wanted a war. He wanted to take the fight to the Centauri. He wanted to crush them under heel. He wanted to go back to that, And we always got that impression that if they had actually declared war, he would be like, yes, we have finally declared war. But now that it's actually here, none of that is present in his voice or his posture. He is quiet and horrified. That's the wrong word. I'm going to use the word dread instead. He realizes with quiet dread exactly what this means. He knows that they have now pushed and pushed and pushed the Centauri, and now the Centauri have pushed back, and now things are worse. It shows in many ways how Jakar has actually grown as a character through the course of this series so far, that he now has a degree of wisdom and greater foresight to him, that he understands the gravity of what war means. If I can do a sidebar for a moment, I have heard some people complain in the past that war tends to be a common element in stories. I've heard some people say that, I'm not going to name any examples, but like there's a story and here's the plot, but then there's a war element in the background, and they think, well, the war element takes too much time away from the main plot or something like that. I tend to think the opposite of that because war is a terrible thing. It is a grand-scale, horrible, atrocious thing that is a very bad thing. It sometimes can be done to accomplish good. Sometimes it is necessary, but it is always going to be a mess. A huge, colossal mess. I've always been of the opinion, and one of the reasons so many of my own stories include war and center around war is because of the fact that it is such a landscape-changing event for the setting, for the characters, for the themes, for the world, for everything involved in any given setting. This episode is when war is finally declared and Babylon 5 has failed. And it has all the gravity and impact that it should. Final note. Rifa has a line about who will become the new emperor, the cousin, a young man who feels as we do about the future. I'm not going to spoil anything, but that gave me a shudder when I heard him say that. That's all I got, guys. I'll see you next week.